Hello everybody and welcome along, I'm Chris Hall and this is the Timeshift, my sci-fi fun fest. Now this is just a quick addendum at the beginning of the video. This video was supposed to be both my top and bottom 5 episodes for this series. However, when it came to editing it, I realised that, well, the combined length of the video would make it about an hour long. And seeing as I'm not quite at the stage where I think I can get away with uploading hour-long videos as yet, I've decided to split into 2 videos. So this week you get double duty of Holds a Right Pack's very own Timeshift. This video is going to be my top 5 episodes. Ooh, the top 5 of the episodes which I think are absolutely wonderful, great and fantastic. So without further ado, here's me in the past, on video, fully formed, still a little bit sickly, there for you to enjoy and stuff and the like. Whee! And so, to kick off our top 5, it's the episode that kicked off this entire series. It's The Woman Who Fell to Earth. As a general rule of thumb, I'm not really a fan of the post-regeneration stories that we get, either because the Doctor is asleep for most of the episode, or alternatively they're way too wacky and quirky for their own good. I ain't a fan of wacky, quirky people, and I ain't a fan of the fact that this means that the Doctor isn't really the Doctor till the final 5 minutes of the story. With this episode, that does happen, but still we end up getting a fantastic opening third of the story. This is really what I think Class should have been. A bunch of everyday normal people going about their day, then all of a sudden Doctor Who-y things happen. The Doctor saves their life, and then they have to deal with the aftermath of it. Though of course discussions about Class are discussions for a later date. I really enjoyed the opening for this story. It helped to establish our characters and our companions in a great way. It helped to see what this new vision of Doctor Who was going to look like, certainly from the cinematography and the directing angle of it. I kind of liked the main mystery of it. It was one that kept me guessing all the way through it, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I may have got a few guesses wrong as to what the big threat was going to end up being. Tim Shaw, yeah, he's a lacklustre villain, and saving him for the series finale was a massive bum move in my opinion, but as an episode as a whole, yeah, it was really fun and enjoyable. At number 4, it's Kablam! Yeah, I understand for some people they're a little bit disappointed with this one, because maybe they were hoping this was going to be an episode which is going to satirise and criticise Amazon and its business practices, as well as the whole concept of automation a little bit more. And for my money, I'm kind of glad that it didn't. This is a story which says that systems in and of themselves are not evil or bad. It's what people do with them that makes them evil or bad, which is a far more mature way in going about it rather than just doing another boo-ha-hum corporations and capitalism sucks kind of thing. This is a story which had a genuinely interesting mystery behind it. I was constantly trying to guess who the real villain of this story was going to be, and then when the true revelation was revealed to us, yeah, I was genuinely surprised by it. My big negative towards the episode, however, is that it doesn't really do much of that twist. The episode ends with pretty much just kind of the same kind of death that most of the villains get in Doctor Who, which I'm not necessarily have a problem with. I am actually glad that the villain in this week's in that particular episode actually got a villainous death, but even so, it doesn't really build with that kind of momentum that we have this sudden realisation that this nice guy that we've seen for most of the episode turned out to be a villain. But you know what, as a whole entity, it was fine, and Twirly is very, very adorable. Bless his cotton socks. Taking up our number 3 slot, it's a bit of local history in deepest, darkest Lancashire, it's the Witchfinders. This is an episode which could have just been your average, thigh-slapping, fun little adventure. Sure, it has some creepy things in it, but you know what, that's all it would have been. A nice little bit of fluff, a Robot of Sherwood level episode, or maybe not, because I understand a lot of people really hated that one, but you know what I mean. One of those fun, light, bright little adventures that you can just sit down, enjoy, then go about the rest of your life when it's finished. An episode that doesn't have a connection to an overall plot or mystery. It doesn't have some kind of socio-political angle to go after. No social justice messaging. It's just a fun little adventure beginning and end to it. With this episode, though, it actually goes a little bit further by having some really compelling supporting performances within it. I really, really loved James Cummings' performance as King James, or I think I might have got that wrong the wrong way around, but you know who I mean. A really fantastic supporting performance within this story, and I really could dig the whole zombie, witch, Evil Dead kind of look to this story. I am kind of bummed out that the way this story was solved was just sticking a thing into a thing and then the villain magically went away, and I don't like the fact that our antagonist for the story, Lady Bev, just turned into a chocolate-faced monster by the end of it. And I do kind of think this episode probably could have done with being a two-parter, but you know what, why spread the material out so thinly when we could have just a solid, good little episode like this? And now we come to number 2. An episode which may surprise a lot of you. it takes you away. It may surprise you, because if you've been watching my reviews of this week's series, or rather this year's series, you'll know that I didn't really rate this episode that highly. I think it might have been due to some of the difficulties going on in my life at the moment that I saw the episode, that I might have been overly harsh on it, but, you know, here I am to rectify things. And this is the moment in the video where we're going to slow things down a little bit and talk about this and the next episode in a little bit more detail. Of course, when we get to the bottom 5, we'll start to bow through it until the bottom 2 again, but that's just background information for you there, dear viewer. This is an episode which, yeah, I think I was overly harsh on when it came out. This is a story which is bloody imaginative. It has so many great and fun little ideas within it. The fact that I gave it such a negative review is kind of alarming for me. This is an episode that really should, and at the end of the day, when I've actually spent time to think about it and watch it again, really pushes a lot of my buttons. It's this frighteningly creative little episode, one which is about an alternate universe, but one that's actually different. All too often in science fiction, when it comes to having the alternate universe story, the alternate universe in question is usually just a universe where everybody has a goatee, or is overly made up, and or is a Nazi. With this particular episode, the alternate universe is alive. It's its own sentient consciousness. It's its own living creature. This thing that just wants friends, just wants people to be around it, just wants to be accepted. And I really like that angle for it. I like the little in-between dimension between our universe and this living universe. I think that the villain inside of it was a little bit peculiar, not in the good way, but in a... You could have done something creative there with it, but still, it was kind of fun all the same. It was a fun, exciting episode, which had a little more creativity going behind it. And that vision of the little puppet frog creature towards the end of the story is just so different and eye-catching that it's hard for me not to like it. Yeah, if I was to go back, I probably would redo that review and be a little bit more positive to it, but, you know, we'll just see where the future goes with us, bearing in mind there's not going to be a series next year, so maybe I'll have to do a re-review episode of that. We'll just have to see. Of course, next year it's the 5th anniversary of Kill the Moon, so maybe it'd be a time to revisit a fair few episodes, but you know what, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. It's a story which really, as far as the performance is concerned, really used its cast very compellingly. The Doctor did, Jodie Whittaker did a great job as a Doctor, as did everyone else. Ryan, Yaz, Graham, they all did fantastically well in their roles, and actually it felt like a fine turning point within the grief that Graham was feeling for the death of his wife. And I think that you know what, this probably should have been the series finale. If we're also going to give it any kind of criticism for the episode itself, I think that the speech that the Doctor gave to the sentient universe about the wonders of her own universe was a little bit too short. That should have been a really great moment, a gift to Jodie Whittaker, to give her a real great little bit of text to really get her nails into, really get her teeth into, and to give us a fantastic scene. But at the end of the day, it wasn't. It was just a short little moment, which I think it kind of needed a little bit more behind it. But with that said, you know what? I think there's been way too many speeches in Doctor Who over the past few years, so maybe I'm willing to forgive that. In any case, It Takes You Away gets our silver medal this year. Now to talk about my all-time favourite episode of this year's series. I think you can guess what it is, but my number one episode for this year's series of Doctor Who, you know what it's going to be. I certainly know what it's going to be because it's my list. It's Rosa. Yeah, it's been a very difficult run to get to this episode, I have to say. To be blunt with you, and maybe this is something I'll talk about at a later date, if it weren't for the fact that I was doing these reviews, I probably would have given up on Doctor Who by now. Probably around the time Kill the Moon came out, I probably would have just given up on it entirely and just not watched the show ever again, even now with a new showrunner and a new Doctor. This is a story which makes me glad to be a fan of Doctor Who. It's a story which, at the end of the day, it's one of those rare moments where you can sit down and say, I'm bloody glad I watched that. It's an episode about racism which doesn't skirt away from the problem. It's an episode about racism that doesn't resort to the same kind of trope that way too many science fiction programs do, which is just set it on an alien planet, have it be a story about red aliens and blue aliens not getting along, then our hero appears, solves the problem, and makes a big speech at the end of the story about how red aliens and blue aliens were created equal and they all can live in peace and harmony. Then they go off to their ship, where it's the Enterprise or the TARDIS, and they do a little speech with their companion about about how the universe is filled with bad people and good people, but if you look deep down, you can see that everybody's the same and it's good people deep down underneath, or something like that. Some big metaphorical or not so metaphorical speech about truth, justice and understanding. Then next week they'd fight the Gorn or something like that. And for me, this is an episode which deals with racism in a very blunt way. It's as close to the bone as a story like this can get in this particular time slot. And that is something that I'll always be grateful for. Given the state of the world right now, it's an episode which really felt as though it was needed. It was a historical episode about someone from the past who isn't really discussed that much within schools within the UK, and to actually have a situation where you can look on Twitter and have all these parents tweeting about how their kids, their 7-year-olds or their 8-year-olds, are telling them all the great things that Rosa Parks did and about the history of the civil rights movement. It's truly a heartening experience. This is an episode which feels closest to the edutainment episodes of classic Doctor Who, and if we are going to have these kind of episodes, it may as well be for things that bits of history that we in the UK don't really cover and stuff which has a little bit more pertinence to it. Because let's be honest, there's only so many episodes you can do where the Doctor goes and visits the Vikings and they fight a multi-toothed, multi-eyed, bug-eyed monster, and then they fist bump the historical character and inadvertently invent something thousands of years before it does. Oh, the Doctor's invented the banana daiquiri a good 500 years before it should be. Ha ha ha, the Doctor's introduced rock music to the Vikings, hoo hoo hoo, ain't that quirky and fun? Though really it kind of disarms everything else in the episode, but you know what, that's a discussion for another time. If I was to give a criticism to this episode, there's two things I think don't work. First of all, I think that the whole sci-fi element of the time-space racist really is something that this episode didn't need. I think this episode could have quite easily functioned had it just been a case of the Doctor arrives on this back in time and discovers, oh crap, there's something wrong with the TARDIS. A piece of it's broken and we need to repair it. And the only way to repair it is to get some parts from the local town. It just so happens that this local town was Alabama during the birth of the civil rights movement, so it's going to be very, very difficult for Ryan and Yaz to blend in, if you know what I mean. Then you could do the whole threat of just being normal people and their prejudices, rather than some guy with some kind of very odd, vague threat of behind him. On the other area of difficulty that I had with it is the fact that I, like many, many people, think that the ending song that they had for this episode really was a little bit too much. It pushed the episode a little bit too far over the edge. I don't know if this was a decision by Mallory Black or by the producers or whomever, but I think it's something that kind of pushed this episode into an uncomfortable territory. Not uncomfortable in necessarily a bad way, like a problematic kind of way, but in a, yeah, you didn't need this. Some light music in the background, either soundtrack or something that our great new soundtrack composer could have done, would have been perfectly great, or just no music at all, and that would have been fine. But you know what, there's worse things to kill an episode over, and bearing in mind that was in the last few minutes of it, it didn't destroy the episode for me, so that's always a plus. So for me, a quick rundown, my top 5 episodes of this year's series, and I'll read them directly off the list, because this decision is very off the cuff from me. At number 5, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. At number 4, Kablam. At number 3, The Witchfinders. At number 2, It Takes You Away, and my number 1 slot, Rosa. And so ends my top 5 selection for my favourite episodes this series. But what about you, dear viewer? Do you agree with my choice? Do you disagree? What are your top and bottom 5 episodes for this series? Let me know and I'll get back to you in the comment section below or towards the end of a future video. Not the next video, because that video has already been pre-recorded, but probably the series finale video. Of course, also giving my your views for your overall feelings of this series as a whole, and I'll be able to get back to you and use them in the video. Anyway, that's enough waffling for me. Thank you for watching, and goodbye!